Brennan here at the National Hurricane Center. It's just after 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, August 14th, coming on with the latest on what is now our third hurricane of the Atlantic hurricane season, Hurricane Ernesto, which was just upgraded this morning. You can see the center of Ernesto currently located about 175 miles to the northwest of San Juan, moving off to the northwest, still rather quickly at 16 miles per hour, but still big rain bands, tropical storm conditions, flooding still occurring over much of Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands. We have flash flood warnings in effect for all of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Culebra, Vieques, and the eastern and southern portions of Puerto Rico. Some of those are indicative of life-threatening flash flooding, and we're still expecting to see significant heavy rainfall across these islands through the next 6 hours or so at least. If you look at the rainfall forecast, we're still expecting storm total rainfall amounts of 4 to 6 inches across the Virgin Islands, 6 to 8 inches over southeastern Puerto Rico, with isolated amounts as high as 10 inches, as well as 2 to 4 inches of rainfall over portions of northwest Puerto Rico. So that's going to be a continuing threat throughout the day today. We still do have a tropical storm warning in effect for the British Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Culebra, Vieques, and Puerto Rico. Still seeing sustained tropical storm force winds in places like St. Croix and Culebra over even just the last hour or so. But those winds will gradually start to pull away. As you can see in orange here, as the tropical storm force wind field associated with Ernesto does extend out well to the east and southeast of the center. But with that fast forward motion, those winds will begin to decrease, but will continue, especially in gusts and especially over portions of the higher terrain of Puerto Rico itself. If we zoom out and look at the forecast here for Ernesto over the next several days, we are expecting a northward and then a northeastward motion over the next few days that's going to bring the center of Ernesto near or over Bermuda during the day on Saturday. So we can see Bermuda here as at or near major hurricane intensity. So Ernesto is expected to strengthen, be at or near major hurricane intensity later this week and this weekend. If we look at the time of arrival of those tropical storm force winds in Bermuda, the most likely time that they would arrive would be sometime during the day on Friday. So we're likely to see a hurricane watch issued for Bermuda later today, as early as this afternoon's advisory package. Beyond that, we're looking at a substantial risk of especially surf and rip current conditions across much of the western Atlantic basin, land areas here, the U.S. East Coast. If you look at the wave height forecast over the next couple, this is late Friday into Saturday, you see the big wave field associated with Ernesto. As it grows in strength and grows in size, you're going to see substantial waves and swells impacting almost the entire east coast of the United States as we go from Friday into Saturday and continuing through the weekend. That's going to create life-threatening surf and rip current conditions across much of the western part of the Atlantic basin. And just a reminder, we lose a lot of people at 2 surf and rip current fatalities on otherwise really nice days to be at the beach when you have a distant hurricane offshore. So you always want to never assume that the ocean is safe. You always want to pay attention to any warning flags that are flying, and also heed any advice you're given by lifeguards or local officials. And if you don't think it's safe, please do stay out of the water. And we don't want you to become a statistic to Ernesto as it remains offshore of the east coast of the U.S. By the time we get into early next week, we could see Ernesto being somewhere in the vicinity of the of Atlantic Canada near Nova Scotia. So this will bear watching for impacts, again, continuing through the day today. Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, British Virgin Islands. Next up on the list is going to be Bermuda, where we could see wind, storm surge, heavy rainfall impacts starting as early as Friday and continuing into Saturday, and then potentially some impacts farther downstream as we get up to Atlantic Canada by early next week. So let's just finish off with the key messages here. We're going to see heavy rainfall continuing to result in locally considerable flash flooding, the risk of mudslides today across the Virgin Islands and portions of Puerto Rico. Tropical storm conditions, especially in those wind gusts, will continue over Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands through the day today. Ernesto is likely to bring impacts to Bermuda later this week, and interest there should be monitoring its progress. We're likely to see a hurricane watch issued for Bermuda later today. And again, even though Ernesto is going to remain well offshore of the U.S. East Coast, we're going to see swells generated by the storm reaching the east coast of the U.S. later this week and into this weekend. So please be safe if you're headed to the ocean. So you can again find more information on Ernesto here at Hurricanes.gov. We'll be with you throughout the event. For those of you in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and along the U.S. East Coast, you can find more information at your local National Weather Service office at weather.gov. We'll be back with more on Ernesto as we go through the rest of the week. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Brennan at the National Hurricane Center.